Hi everyone, welcome to the next episode of Bones and Stones. Today we've got a slightly different episode. We're going to talk about a place in South Africa, in the Northern Cape. It's a really special area filled with archaeology, filled with some really interesting stuff. And to chat to us about it is Dylan Smith. I've got your surname right there, eh?
Yeah.
On my phone it just says Dylan Tswalu. And I know that's not your surname. So Dylan Smith's joining us. And he's going to give us a bit of a chat about the kind of stuff that they do at Tswalu, what the research is, and where they're located, and what kind of reserve they are. So thanks very much, Dylan, for coming on. We really appreciate you. I know, as you say, you've just come off of a game drive. It makes us all very jealous here, stuck in the city. But could you just tell us a bit, what is Tswalu and what do you guys get up to there?
Yeah. No, well, thanks very much for taking the time to chat with me about it. It's always lekker being with you guys. So Tswalu is... it's in the Northern Cape of South Africa, in the semi-arid savanna region. It is southern Kalahari. So we've got a really nice mix between dune-veld, pans, mountains, or more hills than mountains. The reserve is just over 100,000 hectares in extent, so it's a really, really big area. One of our core functions here is conservation of the landscapes and the biodiversity that goes along with that. And to that end, we've got a interesting foundation that supports research on the reserve across the board. So our research is we try break it down into three broad themes. It's not that we're limited to those, but it just kind of gives guidance for people wanting to do research here. That's conservation biology, climate change, and then anthropogenic factors. Now, as we know, you could fit anything into one of those categories, or all of them. We could have a pebble bed reactor here, and we could say it's anthropogenic. There's no, but where we're going with this is, over the years we've had so much focus and attention has been on the biological side, and for very, very good reasons. The Kalahari as a major ecosystem in Southern Africa has really been understudied. And the traditional viewpoint has been that it's a relatively poor area in terms of biodiversity, or biological diversity. If you compare it to the Southern Cape or the Eastern Cape or the Eastern Highlands of Zimbabwe, those areas we just got this massive biodiversity on every level. The Kalahari doesn't compete with that like that. But the beauty there is that it's just been so understudied. As guys are getting a handle on it now, they're just realizing there's just so much here to find out and discover and try to link the Kalahari with other adjacent areas and that. And but where we've gone astray in that, and that's what we really have a big push on at the moment to try to change that, is the anthropogenic side has really taken a backseat, and there was no conscious decision at all about that. That was just, people focused on biodiversity, and the human aspect kind of got sidetracked there. So we're really pushing to change it now. And I've been at Tswalu for just over 15 years now. Sure. And I've located probably, I'd be comfortable in saying probably, almost 100 archaeological sites. Now, that could be a couple of stone flakes lying on a surface of a sand dune somewhere. It could be a pottery shard way out. It could be stone walling, petroglyph, or these rock art sites. But we've just got a huge diversity, and massively understudied. We've got Jane Wilkins and Benjamin Scoville. They started initially doing work through UCT, University of Cape Town. And now they're both based full time in Australia now, but still actively involved here. and they've got a fascinating aspect on the archaeology, particularly the older stuff in the Northern Cape. They started a project a number of years ago called the North of Kuruman Project.
Yeah.
And when I chatted to them about that, they were saying, because my thing has always been, well, why is there so little work being done in these arid areas? Apart from like very, very isolated particular cave sites. Apollo 11, we know of Waterberg Cave where Peter Beaumont has worked for so long, or worked, and when I was chatting to them, they said, well, one of the challenges that archaeologists face in these areas is the sand. So because of the sand, and I'm seeing that on the dunes here, you get vegetated dunes which are fairly stable. But the moment there's less vegetation, you're going through dry cycles, the sand moves, and you just get these like artifacts becoming like you're filtering down through the sand into different. So it becomes incredibly difficult to actually build up a profile of what is actually supposed to be where.
Yeah.
And so thanks, sweetie. And my wife just brought me a bone to eat.
Oh, nice.
So, I'm just kidding. That's for the dog. Yes, so the North of Kuruman project, the guys are really trying to like unravel this Northern Cape archaeology thing. So they've got at Khamahana, at outside Kuruman over here, up towards Taung, they've got a couple of sites that they've been looking at.
Yeah.
And when I was starting to put out feelers a couple of years ago and who would be interested, they got hold of me and said, well, would there be any kind of scope at Tswalu? And we've got amazing finds that initially what triggered my interest in it was finding these Acheulean hand axes lying on the public roads, the district roads in the area. And so then I thought, well, they were laying calcrete on these public roads. So then I just like trying to locate these quarries that they were getting it from. And we've got this like amazing assemblage of artifacts in these quarries. So I've shown Benjamin and Jane these. They're super excited. They've been doing field work here for 2 years. This will be the third field season now. They were going to be coming in now, and that got scuppered. Obviously, all of us are pretty much booked on that. But they're looking at particularly that link between Middle Stone Age and Late Stone Age, okay. Those assemblages and what that degree of overlap is. That's one aspect. And then the other thing that they're looking at is how were early hominids and then modern man in the late Stone Age actually utilizing the landscape? Yeah. So going into these assemblages and saying, okay, here's the artifact. This is the approximate ages that they got in these calcrete beds. What are those artifacts actually comprised of? What are they made from? The parent rock. And where are those nearest deposits of that parent rock to see, how those early clans were actually fitting into the landscape and utilizing landscapes. So that's in a very, very brief nutshell. The other side, that's kind of going back to the deep time there. And we've actually got artifacts now going back to early Stone Age, like well into early Stone Age. And Peter Beaumont, and I think when I met with you a while back, we touched on it briefly. Peter Beaumont actually located before he passed away, he said him and I went to look for it. He said he located probably 10 years ago on a surface artifact, but that seemed to have been dug out of an aardvark burrow when the thing was excavating, going back to Alderaan, and Rian Rifkin, he popped out here. He's done some nice work on the petroglyphs here. Yeah. And him and I were chatting, and, there seems to be good evidence for Alderaan. So, we've got this massive time scale here, but so little work that's been done on it. The other thing is slightly more a lot more recent are the Iron Age sites that we got on Tswalu. Fantastic Iron Age sites. So we're really trying to engage guys to actually get work going, because we have zero data on this. There's nothing that's been done on dating the actual sites on Tswalu, and we think there's a really nice continuum on the older stone walls right up to very, very recent in terms of the changing structural design on these sites and that as well. So there's a huge amount of scope for some good work to be done here. But anyway, that's it in a absolute nutshell. And if you've got any questions, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds really interesting. It sounds like you have an incredible range of archaeology there that most landscapes don't have that kind of spread. It's really cool. I do hope the Artvark had a permit from SARA before it excavated those artifacts. That's a slight
I think I think he thought it would be easier just to go ahead without it.
Yeah. So, and then in terms of the kind of work in archaeology and on these different sequences, the types of work that you guys would be or the sort of fields you'd welcome people into Tswalu from, would it be anything, from the rock art to earlier Stone Age to any aspect of the archaeology, or do you have specific angles you would take?
No, we've got that's a fascinating question on a number of different levels there, because on the face of it, we can say, yeah, cool. Yeah, any archaeological research is good, and we know this is absolutely this. But I had a number of guys that said they actually were doing a conference, and for the life of me, I can't remember who they were. And one of the challenges that we faced, and our Pippa Scottness, from the Keller School of Fine Art, head of the department there, she's looking at it. Well, she's currently engaged in a lovely project here called Animal Collegium. And it's really delving into the relatively recent, like, let's say, pre-colonial to colonial times to where we are now, of people utilizing these landscapes and how they perceived wildlife, what wildlife populations were doing. And that project runs all the way from here right down to the Huntersberg, around the Cape, Southern Cape area there. And what we're finding is just this absolute paucity of solid information on these more recent times. And you tend to find young archaeologists come into the field, and everyone wants to find that Homo erectus clutching that hand axe while being attacked by a saber-toothed tiger, and he's busy mating at the same time, and there's a fossil T-Rex in the background. Well, we know those kind of scenarios are going to be few and far between, and everyone wants to find that link that, like, says, okay, this is
big special,
But yeah, exactly. So you find so many students that want to go into that, and that's brilliant, and we will always actively encourage that. But at the same time, there's this like more recent link to the past that we're just missing so much data on. As an example, we've got a lovely old house over here that's actually being, guys have looked at it and said, yeah, it's nice, but there's no massive historical significance there. It's kind of like turn of last century, like 19, 17, 18, 20, that time. But when you go into it and try to find, okay, well, who is the person that had the title deed to that farm? No data. Who are the people that actually built the house? Yeah. No data. And so there's fantastic scope, and not just on Tswalu. We would also, obviously, being based and having the focal point of Tswalu is great, but there's lovely scope for using us as a base, doing work here, but then just going further afield, even if it's to neighboring farms, and saying, well, how does Tswalu and our archaeology tie into the bigger picture? Because I think that's a starting point at any of these sites, is to acknowledge that they're not in isolation.
Yeah.
Every one of these sites is inextricably linked with sites all over the place. And, the colonial people were utilizing the landscape. They were tied there. The San, Bushmen, they weren't just like fixed at one spot. They were utilizing these landscapes. Pre-modern men, they were utilizing landscapes. So for us to look at Tswalu in its, in a singular, as a singular entity, it doesn't make sense from an archaeological perspective. So there's a huge amount of scope across the board for that kind of researcher.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, what you're saying, because if you've got these sites that are not necessarily your big rock shelters with nice, pristine and well looked after sequences, incorporating the landscape into understanding the cultural distribution and sequences is really important, because it's what connects and binds these things together. But let me jump to your question.
Dylan, thanks very much. This has been incredibly interesting so far. It's really interesting to hear about how complex the cultural landscape is in a reserve like Tswalu. But maybe if I could just touch on something you spoke about a little bit earlier, about the kind of unintentional direction of the research originally, where it wasn't focused on the anthropogenic aspects. Now, a few weeks back, we spoke with Lawrence Kruger who was Inskakuza in Kruger. And he also spoke about how within Kruger Park, not to compare obviously Tswalu to Kruger, very different reserves obviously, but there's a lot of cultural material within Kruger as well. And originally there was perhaps a shift, or at least the research agenda was very much biodiversity focused. And now there has been a shift to look at these cultural aspects. And Lawrence spoke a lot about the landscape that they've got there. So I just wanted to find out what is causing that shift in terms of moving to look at anthropogenic research. Are the guests driving it? So in other words, is it the international tourists who come to the reserve to say, look, we want a more holistic experience of this landscape. We don't only want to learn about the animals and the birds, etc. We want to learn about the deep time sequences. Is that what's driving it, or is it coming more from another angle?
No, okay. Another great question there, Matt, is, one thing is my own personal interest for a long time. I'm a very much a generalist. I've got no particular field, but I've always enjoyed archaeology. So on every reserve I've worked on, down in the Lowveld, up in Madikwe, here, I've always gone out of my way to try locate sites, find things. So that's my own personal interest, and I've punted this for a long time. From a guest perspective, our guides have always, from day one, taken guests to our petroglyph sites, our rock art sites, and it's always been interesting. But I've just felt for too long we've sat down on our on historical research. So you go pull out some stuff that's been written on petroglyphs, and not necessarily here. We were very, very fortunate to have Rion Rifkin, who actually started as a guide at Tswalu, with a passion and strong interest in archaeology, and he actually started studying it, as you guys know, and did a lovely bit of work on Klipbak, one of our rock art sites here. So that sparked more of an interest, but we've kind of like, I don't know if stagnated is the right word, but we kind of like got frozen in time and said, well, okay, well, cool, now we've got this information, that's what we keep passing on to guests. And I'm just saying, well, why? There's just, and the more that I've started exploring the reserve, I mean, I worked out conservatively over 15 years, I've probably done about 7,000 kilometers on foot.
Wow.
Just, that's walking, that's excluding like game drive time, that kind of stuff. That's just walking on Tswalu. And just what I've seen over those years is this incredible diversity and mass of evidence of human occupation of these landscapes. And yet we've just focused, and again, it wasn't a conscious decision. A limited number of researchers can only do a limited amount of work. That's the reality, and it's getting enough students to be interested in it. It's getting funding for it. So you're coming back to your question there. I think it's being driven from a number of different aspects there. We need active interest from archaeological circles to say, well, actually, yeah, let's put the challenges of deep sand aside, and let's find out ways of actually tackling this head on. But then we need the students that are interested. We need funding streams, and those we can get around those kind of things quite easily. But then from my side, we really need to build up a database, an effective database, that our guides are empowered to transfer this knowledge to guests. Because if you're dealing with a limited amount of knowledge, well, of course, your guides can't go out there and do it by themselves. So they will keep giving the guests the amount of knowledge that they got. But that being said, there is more and more and more of a hunger from people visiting, and not just at Tswalu, I'm talking across the board here, of visiting reserves and going beyond seeing the lions and seeing the elephant and seeing the leopard lying in a tree on a kill, to actually understanding landscapes, understanding communities that are currently living in these landscapes, like our staff, people that have grown up in these areas that want to hear the stories behind those, and then going into the deeper history of these, and how have these landscapes changed in terms of climate, in terms of biodiversity, in terms of human habitation of these landscapes. And I think it's a miss of any reserve if we're not going down this route. So that's kind of where we're coming from in terms of saying, well, and you touched on the word holistic. We're looking at our research now as being more holistic and encompassing, as rather than just saying focusing on one aspect there.
Okay. Yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks, Dylan. That's awesome. I think we're sort of running out of time here, but It's really interesting to hear about this reserve. It's such an incredible place. Can't wait for my invite to arrive in the post. But no, I'm joking.
Again.
But I think, hopefully if there are people who are watching this or listening and sort of think there might be some research interest that they'd like to take up, I think they can chat to you, Dylan, if that's correct, and contact you and start speaking through some ideas.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay. So yeah, give Dylan a shout.
And like I said, and the other thing is that while we're on that is we are open to suggestions. We've got no fixed agenda that it has to be focused on rock art or early Stone Age or stone walls. If someone comes up with a novel idea of different ways of looking, and the key thing there is we encourage our research teams to collaborate. So, it can be quite daunting to come into this landscape with a clean slate. So, geez, okay, where do I start? But Benjamin and Jane, they've got a fantastic thing going there. They're brilliant researchers. They put a lot of time and effort. And obviously, we need to preserve the integrity of the research and cannot compromise their work. I mean, we know this in any of the fields. And we will go to every effort that we can to support new research. We will actively encourage collaborations between them in order to get the absolute best quality research at the end of the day. So, yeah, that's in a nutshell where we are.
So thanks, Dylan. That's awesome. And thanks for coming on and chatting to us and introducing us to this really amazing sequence. And hopefully one day we'll find ourselves in your neck of the woods and we'll pop in and say, how's it? But otherwise, when you're up here, give us a shout and, we can make sure well.
Anytime, mate. Anytime.
Great. Thanks, Dylan.
It's great having you guys with, and thanks so much for taking the time to chat. It's been an absolute pleasure as always.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. You take care.